Spread these 4 rows from my jacket to here, all these seats. Don't let it all in yet. From my jacket, part of my jacket. Someone gets in there if they want. My jacket. All the way to this row. Last row on the top.
take a moment right now to either silence your phones, put them on Do Not Disturb, or turn them fully off. They're very distracting. My name is Allison in person. I use she, her pronouns, and I identify as queer.
My name is Sai Tao. I use any pronouns and I identify as an agender lesbian.
Today we are talking about queer history. The definition of queer history, of the way we are defining it, is the history of identities and progress within the LGBTQIA+ community. This includes people throughout history who are part of the community, events, protests, activism, discrimination, and evolution of labels.
Some of you may have seen Ms. Erin Reed's presentation during B-Block. This presentation will be more centralized around the entire community instead of just the trans community, and it will be more focused on people rather than legislation.
Our thesis for this presentation is why is queerness thought of as a Western and modern thing, and we're trying to prove in this presentation that is not true, and that it is a thing that has existed over thousands of years throughout the entire world. For the first half of the presentation, we will be talking about queer people around the world. Our first person will be Emperor Ai of the Han Dynasty, who used he, him pronouns and likely would have identified as bisexual today.
Then we will talk about Sappho of Lesbos, who we're using she, her pronouns for and using the label queer. Then we are moving on to Julie Dalbany, who we are again using she, her pronouns for, and we're using the label bi to describe her.
We will then be talking about Wewa, who is part of a Native American tribe. We don't know what pronouns they would use, but we are using they and them as the closest English equivalent, and they identified as two spirits.
Finally, for our queer people around the world, we will touch on Harry Allen, who used he, him pronouns and was a trans man in the United States. Then, after our queer people, we will talk about activism in the queer community, starting with the Stonewall riots, which were the catalyst for the future of queer activism in the United States.
And then we will talk about the Day of Silence, which we are also doing tomorrow, which is one of the first widespread in-school queer activism movements. At the end, we will take questions. We will have a QR code, so if you have a question throughout our presentation, please try to remember.
Just as a disclaimer, in this presentation, we will be using queer as an umbrella term for the entire LGBTQ+ community. We are using the reclaimed version of this word. We understand that for some people in the community, it is used as a derogatory term, but we are using the reclaimed version.
One other disclaimer before we begin is that we will be using modern labels to describe sometimes quite ancient figures. So these labels did not exist at the time and may not be 100% accurate to what they will identify as today, but they are just educated guesses based on multiple sources and as much information as we could gather. The first figure we are talking about is Emperor Ai of the Han Dynasty. He used he, him pronouns. He lived in ancient China between the years of 27 and 1 BCE. If he lived today, he probably would have identified as bisexual because he had both female and male partners. Emperor Ai became emperor at the age of 20. Instead of the usual inherited from his father, he instead was chosen by his uncle to be emperor because they thought he was very smart and capable. So his most famous male lover was Dongxian. And the way they met is that Emperor Ai saw him at court and thought he was very pretty, so decided to make him his lover. And then, essentially for the next few years, Dongxian followed Emperor Ai around and would accompany him basically everywhere. And Emperor Ai gave him a lot of privileges and court positions, including making him captain of the armed guard. He also promoted Dongxian's family to high positions of power, including making his sister a concubine. And any other court officials who spoke out against all these essentially random people getting put in extremely high positions of power in court were imprisoned or exiled. One of the most famous stories from Dongxian and Emperor Ai's relationship is the cut sleeve story. Essentially, Emperor Ai and Dongxian were taking a nap together, and Emperor Ai woke up before Dongxian. And because Emperor Ai did not want to wake up Dongxian, he instead cut off his very long sleeve that Dongxian was laying on, so that he would not wake him up. And then other palace officials saw him walking around with his sleeve cut off and decided that this was a cool fashion trend that they would copy, and they also thought that it would maybe make them more popular with the emperor. And then it became a fashion trend in the court, and it is now used as a euphemism for for gayness or male love. At one point, because of Emperor Ai wanting to give Dongxian such power and a lot of positions in court, he wanted to abdicate the throne to Dongxian, but his entire court freaked out, and he had to back down from this idea. Then after basically a lot of the court was just Dongxian's family members, and Dongxian was captain of the armed guard, which he never actually fulfilled any of his roles as captain of the armed guard. He just followed Emperor Ai around. And then Emperor Ai suddenly died at the age of 26. And Dongxian was so crushed by this that he did nothing at all except cry for like a week, until the Empress Dowager, the mother of the emperor, dismissed Dongxian from the palace, and then made her other son emperor.
Now we will be moving on to one of the most famous queer women in history, Sappho of Lesbos. Sappho lived in ancient Greece in around 630 to 570 BCE. She was born to a wealthy family in Mytilene, Lesbos, which is an island in Greece. Her family was eventually exiled to Sicily, where she spent the rest of her life. Sappho is most well known for lyric poetry about her desire for other women. Lyric poetry is poetry that was read along to a lyre, but in practice was actually poetry written from the first person. That is really all we know about Sappho, since she existed so long ago, which is not surprising. It's fairly commonplace for ancient Greek figures to not have much information about them. We have some rumors that she allegedly had a husband named Kerklius of Andros, but we have discovered that he likely did not exist, because when you translate his name from ancient Greek into English, his name translates to penis of man. Because of this translation, we have concluded that his existence was likely a joke that was eventually lost to time and translation. Sappho wrote a lot of poems. However, we have lost most of her poems, partly due to the burning of the Library of Alexandria, but also because when Alexander the Great colonized the world, her poetry was no longer available since it was written in Aeolic Greek, and Alexander the Great made everyone speak Conic Greek. The few poems we have are the Ode to Aphrodite, Fragment 1, the Brothers poem, and the Kypris. Most of her other poems are only in fragments, a few sentences, and sometimes just single words. The Ode to Aphrodite is by far her most famous poem. It's a love poem from Sappho's perspective, praying to the love goddess Aphrodite to help her deal with this girl she likes. But Fragment 31 is my personal favorite because I'll read the poem to you. That man seems to me to be equal to the gods, who is sitting opposite you, and hears you nearby speaking sweetly and laughing delightfully, which indeed makes my heart flutter in my breast. For when I look at you for even a short time, it is no longer possible for me to speak, but it is as if my tongue is broken, and immediately a subtle fire has run over my skin. I cannot see anything with my eyes, and my ears are buzzing. A cold sweat comes over me, trembling, seizes me all over. I am paler than grass, and I seem to newly have died. So I think that is by far her most gay poem that we have. Surprisingly, queer interpretations of Sappho's poetry is surprisingly recent, because though the ancient Greeks did think that she slept with both men and women, the Byzantines thought that it was slanderous to say that Sappho would have slept with women, which makes me think that they didn't read any of her poetry. Her name and the island that she is from influenced the modern labels of lesbian and sapphic today, which describe women who are attracted to other women and also non-binary people. Because of how language evolved for her name, the island of Lesbos actually sued all lesbians in the world in 2008. This was eventually thrown out though, because saying that lesbians usurp the title of lesbian from an island, from a group of people on an island is not a very good case. The most popular story of her death is that she jumped off some cliffs because she was heartbroken over her unrequited love for a sailor. This is likely untrue though, because the first record we have of this is from a comedy play written about 300 years after her death. Next, we will move to Julie Daubeny. Julie lived in France in 670 to 1707. She was born to a middle-class family who worked for the king, who at the time was King Louis XIV. Her family specifically worked in the royal stables, and she was educated in reading, dancing, drawing, horseback riding, and especially sword fighting. At a young age, she ran away from home with her boyfriend's fencing master after he killed a guy in a duel. They traveled around France together, but eventually she got bored of him and started dating this other girl that she met on the road. Her girlfriend's family did not approve of their relationship and sent her girlfriend to live in a convent, at which point Julie came up with the amazing plan to join the convent, steal a nun's body, hide it in her girlfriend's bed, and then set the convent on fire. This worked, and she and her girlfriend were able to travel the countryside together. But eventually, her girlfriend left her and went back to her family. Then her family took the case to court, and Julie was sentenced to be burned at the stake. However, no one could find her, so she never was. Eventually, Julie decided that she wanted to join the Paris Opera, so she wrote to a former boyfriend of hers who worked for the king and asked him to please get the king to pardon her of her crimes. And again, this somehow worked. The king was very amused by Julie's various antics and pardoned her of all crimes and allowed her to join the opera. This was partly due to the fact that the king himself started the opera and participated in it a lot. In this time period in France, queerness was generally tolerated because while many people were not fully comfortable with queerness itself, it was not outlawed because the king's brother was actually gay. So this was a strangely tolerant time in France. Julie starred in 29 operas and quickly rose to fame because of her amazing acting ability. And While working in the opera, she stayed true to herself. She still partook in many duels, and once even beat up one of her castmates for pestering some of her other castmates. One time, during a party she was invited to by the king's brother, she kissed a noblewoman and was challenged to a duel by three suitors. She defeated all three of those suitors and then went back to the party. However, this was illegal, so she then ran away to Brussels. During her exile, she dated a German prince and then went back to France a year later and rejoined the opera. Also, in the opera, she was known as Mademoiselle Maupin, or La Maupin, because as a young woman, she was married to one Monsieur Maupin. As her life continued, it started to calm down a little bit, and nearing the end of her life, she had another girlfriend. I'm going to try my best to pronounce this. Madame la Marquise de Florensac. But then once her girlfriend died, she was so distraught that she joined a convent for real this time, and spent the last years of her life there, and she died at the age of 37.
The next person we're going to talk about is Wewa, who lived in North America in what is now New Mexico between the years of 1849 and 1896, and as a Native American tribe, Zuni. We are going to use they/them pronouns because they spoke a different language, so we don't have an exact correlation for what pronouns they would have used, but we think that they/them was the most accurate for English pronouns. Wewa was born a biological male, but in their Native American tribe, there's something called two-spirit, or mamana, which is a third gender thought to contain both masculine and feminine spirits, but is separate from men and women. Two-spirit people share the responsibilities of both men and women, along with unique roles. They often hold spiritual positions because of the belief that they are the result of supernatural intervention. Wewa was orphaned as an infant and adopted by their paternal aunt. They remain a part of their mother's tribe but stay connected to their father's tribe through ceremonies. Wewa specifically took on many social and ceremonial roles, generally for women. They mostly wore women's clothing, but not exclusively, and did work that was traditionally done by women. They were instructed by men, but trained mostly under women to learn household tasks, including grinding corn. They specialized in pottery, a traditionally feminine role, and textiles or weaving, traditionally a masculine role. They joined a number of societies, including the Medicine Society, which I'm going to try my best to pronounce this, is Beshatsilo Hue, or the Bedfoot people, after a shaman cured them of an ailment. Their tribe allied with the U.S. government to be protected from raids from several other tribes that were happening at the time, and Wewa was part of the negotiations of this agreement, and when they visited the capital for negotiations, the U.S. officials that were doing negotiations believed Wewa to be a woman and were absolutely shocked that a woman was able to do negotiations. Throughout Wewa's life, they tried to preserve history, traditions, and culture of the Zuni people, including with these societies that they joined, including the Bigfoot people, and they joined these societies to get a lot of more historical information and cultural information that they could use and preserve to help the culture of their tribe live on. They died at the age of 49 from heart disease, and this was considered a calamity among the Zuni people because two-spirit people were considered from divine intervention or supernatural intervention, so this is considered a great calamity. The last person we will be talking about is Harry Allen, who we know used he/him pronouns, and the word trans wasn't commonly used at the time, but we believe they would have identified as trans. They lived September 11th, 1882 to December 27th, 1922. He was born in Indiana but moved to Washington in 1884. He worked as a bartender, hotel clerk, and several other small or odd jobs. He was assigned to Eagle at birth and transitioned to a man early in life. His mother described him as boyish as a child and preferred to do farm work as opposed to other masculine jobs. He insisted on using his chosen name pronouns and using male clothing and appearing more masculine or male, even when the police and many other people disrespected these. They apparently passed very convincingly as a cisgender man. Being transgender was illegal at the time, so he commonly lied to police to get them to leave him alone, saying that he just liked to cross-dress and that it wasn't a crime that he looked better in men's clothing. On several occasions, the police would try to force him to wear dresses or skirts, and he would choose solitary confinement over these garments. He was outed by multiple different newspapers, which turned him into a public figure. He also went by Harry Livingston or Livingstone, likely because of harassment for his gender from the press. At 15, he was married to an older man and gave birth to a son. His husband then disappeared. Interestingly, his death certificate stated that he was single, not married or widowed.
Of the newspaper articles written about him, there were many, and most of them, if not all of them, were exaggerated or untrue because they tried to villainize him and label him as dangerous. They often conflicted because they couldn't seem to agree on whether or not to label him as a man or as a confused woman. As a way to label him as dangerous, they often highlighted his masculine qualities, such as his powerful muscles. But he was often said to, but there were conflicting sources on whether or not he did pass as a cisgender man. One article claimed that he was arrested hundreds of times, but that was likely just an exaggeration. And though Harry did do a few minor criminal acts, he lived pretty normally and was just constantly harassed by the police and the press. As stated before, he once gave a statement to the newspaper saying that it wasn't a crime, that he just looked better in men's clothing, and that the police should just leave him alone. One part of his life that was highly publicized was his relationships with women. This was partly due to multiple stories claiming that his girlfriends had committed suicide after finding out that he was either a trans man or because they thought he had cheated on them. But after looking through these newspapers, we have concluded that most of these claims, if not all of them, were most likely false because the facts never stayed consistent over time. Facts like the girlfriend's names, how they died, what he did to them, just never seemed to add up. Once when questioned about one of these incidents, he denied and said that he was still friends with this woman and that she was not dead. At 40 years old, he died from syphilitic meningitis. Now we'll move on to queer activism in the community. First, we will start with the Stonewall riots, which are one of the most famous examples of queer activism and one of the first in America. The Stonewall riots was named after the Stonewall Inn, which was a gay bar in New York City. homosexuality at the time was illegal in New York and in many other parts of the country, but gay bars were fairly common because they gave a space for members of the community to get together. The Stonewall Inn was well known for their connections with the mob because the mob would frequently pay off the police so they wouldn't get raided as much, but the bar still got raided quite often. In the early mornings of June 28, 1969, the bar was raided again, but this time the patrons of the bar fought back against the police. The most popular story is that one of two queer activists named Marsha P. Johnson or Stormy DeLarverie, started the riot after witnessing a police officer commit brutality against their friends and threw a punch or a brick at the police officer. However, both of these individuals have denied this claim. The riots lasted for 5 days and was eventually resolved when the rioters decided I guess they had something that they should do. At the time, it was a very controversial move in the community because many people, especially older people and those who were closeted, thought the riots were too disruptive and they preferred staying in the closet. During the riots, both members of the community and straight people would join on Christopher Street, which was the street where Stonewall was located, and they would hold hands and block off the entire street, saying that this street belonged to the gays, because they wanted to showcase to straight people how it felt to be discriminated against due to their sexual orientation. Stonewall is often referred to as the first Pride Parade. If you've ever seen the phrase, the first Pride was a protest or a riot or some variation, Stonewall is the reason.
Now we're going to talk about the Day of Silence, which is actually happening tomorrow. The first Day of Silence was started at the University of Virginia in 1996. It was made as a crafts project for nonviolent protests, and in the first year, over 150 students participated. Not all of these people were gay students. Many of them were just allies supporting their gay friends. Glenson, the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, now hosts the Day of Silence. It is celebrated by schools all around the country. Glenson has made the decision last month to make the Day of Silence about breaking the silence, a day of queer activism celebrating queer identities. But it was on such short notice that we did not have time to pivot for this year, but that is how we are going to celebrate it next year. We actually have pins that we will be giving out at the end. If you guys know that you won't lose them, because we will also be giving them out at the theater entrance, Tiger Drive, and the cafeteria tomorrow morning.
Thank you for listening. To wrap up this presentation, I will answer our thesis, why is queerness thought of as a Western and modern idea? We have shown that queer people have existed for thousands of years all over the world. However, queerness, the way that we think about queerness in the United States is relatively modern because of the activism that has, because our country's history in the grand scheme of things is relatively short, and the history of queer activism in the United States is even shorter because the Stonewall riots, which happened in 1986, were some of the first examples of people showing their identity and not being ashamed of it. So we want you to think about how you think about queerness and whether or not you think about queerness as a Western idea or if you can keep in mind that queerness has existed for thousands of years, as long as people have existed. Thank you.
will be taking questions through the QR code. If the internet's being not working, you can also raise your hand. Be brave. You can all do it if you want to. If you really don't want to raise your hand and if the QR code isn't working for you, we also have a DSA Hangout during WIN that you can sign up for, and you can ask questions then if you remember that.
So King Louis XIV was, okay, so the question was, why did the king pardon Julie Daubeny? He pardoned her because, as I said, he was very involved in the arts. He specifically started the opera and was a part of many shows in the opera. This was a time of power struggles in France, and he was trying to convince artists to be on his side and focus their rage on the church instead of on him. So Julie was not the only example of someone who is outwardly controversial being pardoned by the king. He also just thought that she was kind of funny. Lesbian is a word to describe someone who is not a man who only likes other people who do not identify as men. Sapphic is generally an umbrella term, which describes people who do not identify as men, who like other people who do not identify as men, but this is not limited to just those who don't identify as male. Some terms that fall under the Sapphic umbrella are bisexual, pansexual, and lesbian. Sapphic is generally just a broader term.
The question is, where can people get the pins? We are going to be handing them out at the end of this presentation as you're leaving. If like you could have your teacher come up and collect some for your class, or you can grab them yourself. And then we will also be handing them out tomorrow morning between 8:40 and 9 a.m. at the theater end. We will have a bucket at the theater entrance with someone giving out pins. We will have 2 buckets and 2 people at the cafeteria handing out pins, and we will also have someone at Tiger Drive handing out pins. The question is why we assign modern labels to ancient figures and from places that are not, and we assign Western labels. The reason why we chose to do that for this presentation, and we did it as educated guesses and as accurately as we could, was to make it easier for people to understand how these people identified and how they acted as related to their gender or sexual orientation, because adding a label to them makes it a little bit easier for people to understand who don't specifically know a lot of information about these specific people.
Queer is an umbrella, the question was, what does queer mean? Queer is an umbrella term used in the community to describe anyone who falls under the LGBTQ+ umbrella. It was originally, the actual word just means like something that's out of the ordinary, and it was originally used as a derogatory term against people in the community, but now we have generally reclaimed that term. So gender-neutral pronouns in English, we obviously have they, them. I speak Chinese, and in Chinese, our pronoun, we generally only use one pronoun, ta. When writing, the gender of the person is denoted by a radical that will signify the gender, but they're said the same, and when there's multiple people, it's tamen, and so in Chinese, gender is not really a big part of the language.
I speak some amount of Spanish, and in Spanish there have been several attempts to add gender-neutral word pronouns to the language. The most recent has been ella, to mean instead of ARL, and it would mean they, them. But over the years there's been, I think, fewer and more attempts to add gender-neutral pronouns, and some of them have worked and some of them have not worked. And we can't really talk much about languages we don't speak or know that much about because of we don't know the language. So, but a lot of languages have been trying to incorporate gender-neutral pronouns to be to help with non-binary people who live in those countries and people who don't have a binary gender. Some of the places we're just going to say for the people we researched, we found information on Harry Allen from some newspapers from the area where he lived, the town he lived in. From that time period, we found a lot of newspaper articles because he was quite publicized. There was a lot of publicity about him, so we found a lot of newspaper articles. Some to varying degrees of accuracy, so we tried to get a bunch of different newspapers and newspaper articles to have bigger picture look rather than specifics, because a lot of the specifics are muddled with hearsay. For Emperor I of the Han, I watched a YouTube video by someone who does a lot of informational videos on like Chinese history, and they listed a lot of their sources in the. We also used Britannica for a little bit of it.
For Sappho, I searched, I found an article on Britannica about her, and then I watched another YouTube video which had their sources listed in the description. For Julie, there was another YouTube video, and also an article from Yale, I think, or Britannica, I don't remember which one. For Weiwa, we got an article from the, it was like the International Women's Museum or something.
If any of you want to read the specifics of any of these sources, you can email me, Allison in person. Just look it up and you can email me and I can send you a list of our sources if you want to read more about it.
The question was, in our opinion, why is it so important to learn about queer history? In my opinion, as someone who has grown up queer, someone who is growing up queer, it is important for me to see representation in what I learn and what I consume, and that includes places like school where it's important to see people who are like you. And I think it is important for other people to also learn about these people, even if they're not necessarily in the community, because it is important for people to understand that not everyone falls under the same labels that you do.
For me, it's important to learn about queer history because I didn't know any terms or anything about. I didn't know that these terms existed or that I could be something other than straight or cis until fairly recently. And I feel like that people learning about it earlier, especially in adolescence, gives them a whole new opportunity of ways to express themselves and things to explore in like their time of exploration of figuring out who they are and how they want to identify and what they want to do with their life. So I also think that, I think learning about it in middle school, high school, even late elementary school is really good so that you can begin exploring your identity. I also think learning about it is really important because recently there's been a lot of attempts, and especially states like Florida and Texas, but even all over the U.S. to silence certain events and certain problems that have happened in history to not make kids feel bad or to not talk about them. And I think it's really important to talk about even bad things that have happened in history so that we don't have a repeat of events, so that these bad things don't happen again. The question is, was the emperor allowed to have a male lover because he was the emperor? I know for that dynasty specifically, a lot of them had male and female lovers, and I know that a lot of, it was like the emperor could have a male lover because he was the emperor, and not really, you can't really arrest the emperor for having a male lover. But I don't think it was widely, from what I remember, it wasn't widely accepted in ancient China to have a male lover, but in some time periods it was more accepted than others.
The question is, how did the term queer go from derogatory to prideful? It was first used as a slur, quite like the F slur, but as time went on, it was reclaimed by the community to mean just people in the community in general. I haven't looked much into the research on on the actual events on how that happened, but I know that some older people in the community still feel uncomfortable around the term, which is why we felt the need to explain our use of it today.
I also haven't done research into specific events, but I do know that over time, the queer community started using queer as a word to just mean an umbrella term for their community and could basically the way of like not having it hurt you if you use it. So they were using it as a way to like fight back against LGBTQIA plus like hate stuff. So the question is, what is the plus in LGBTQIA plus? Well, there's a lot of different versions of that acronym. There's LGBT, there's LGBTQ, there's LGBTQ plus, there's LGBTQIA plus. I use the longer one generally, but other people use the shorter one. The plus is to signify all the other identities that can't be put in the acronym. So you can't have like a 60-letter long acronym because then it wouldn't be an acronym. It would be too long to use for anything. So the plus is meant to symbolize all the identities that can't be put in like a 6-letter acronym and can't be, and also the ones that like haven't been expressed by people yet. Because there's always new expressions and new ways to express the identities that we've already defined as labels, and also the labels are fluid and have been changing slightly over time depending on how people are using them and how people are expressing these specific labels.
The question was, were the Stonewall riots the first example of queer activism in the community? It probably wasn't, honestly, but it was the first one that was like, okay, let's do this. How many of you have heard of Stonewall before? A good portion of you. So it's a very well-known event in queer history. It's one of the few events in queer history that most people know, other than like the AIDS crisis. So that's why we decided to touch on it. It probably wasn't the first ever, but is the most well-known one. It is the most widespread one, and it was definitely the biggest for that time period.
It's also somewhat seen as like the beginning of the the big queer activism movement and the big push for the legalization of same-sex marriage.
It really depends on the person. The question was, can non-queer people say queer? It depends on the person. As I said, some people in the community feel very uncomfortable with the term queer. So just using it willy-nilly is probably not going to go well. And if you do decide to use it, definitely be aware of the way you are using it, because it is still a very sensitive term for a lot of people. But I personally don't think that is wrong to use it as a way to denote someone who is part of the community.
It also kind of depends on who you're talking about. Like if you're saying a specific person is queer, some people don't identify with that label and other people do. So if you want to, just a simple question of like, can I refer to you as queer, can be the answer to that question of whether you can use that for that specific person. And also using the way you use it. So if you're using it as a derogatory term, that's like never okay. But if you're using it as an umbrella term for the LGBTQIA+ community, then in most instances, it will be accepted by people. But in some instances, especially with older people in the community, it can still feel hurtful to be called that term.
So the question was, can we talk a little bit about LGBTQ rights in other countries across the world? So it really depends on the country. Greece recently passed the same-sex marriage proposal. Thailand did too. Yay! So gay people can get married in those countries now. Unfortunately, in last year or something, Uganda passed a death penalty for homosexuality in that country. So queerness still has a long way to go to be accepted in many parts of the world.
I did a research project on this recently, so like a month ago. I don't remember exactly which countries, but I remember that the first country to legalize same-sex marriage, it was either 2003 or 2005 that happened, and I believe it was either Finland or Denmark. Those are like the first two. And I think at this point there are 36 countries, because one legalized it this year, that legalized same-sex marriage. And there are more that have bills or in the process of legalizing same-sex marriage. And there are also others that are doing death penalties for it or making it illegal. So if you want to know about a very specific country, then it would be better to do probably your own research on the history of bills or laws passed in that country and what the status of their same-sex marriage laws are right now.
Before the next question. Furthermore, though marriage is legal for many places around the world, same-sex adoption is illegal in some places where marriage is legal, because of the idea that queer people are dangerous to children. And for trans people, it can be very difficult to get gender-affirming care in certain parts of the world, especially in places that already don't accept the LGBTQ+ community. So yeah.
So the question was, can you explain neopronouns? And neopronouns are essentially equivalent or similar to they, them, but they're for people who don't really think that they, them fits them. So, like, for trans people, it's like they identify more with either female or male or somewhere in between. And for people who use neopronouns, they don't identify with she, her, or they, them, or he, him, and want a different pronoun set that fits their identity more.
There's a lot of stigmatism around it because it was labeled as kind of cringy during the pandemic, but is important that we remember that we have to respect other people's identities, even if you don't understand them. Some common examples of neopronouns are sie, them, their, their, and em, theirs. When people say that they use, the question is, can you explain the pronouns he, they, or she, they? Right? When people say that they use he, they pronouns or she, they pronouns or something like that, it means that they identify with both of those pronouns, and either one will work. Usually, the order of the pronouns signifies how much they identify with that specific pronoun. So sometimes people will say that they use they, she pronouns, which means they prefer that you would use they, them, but they're okay with she, her pronouns.
Also, just a good idea if you know someone who uses like they, them, they, she, or she, they, to just ask which one they prefer, because that's just a really good way to respect their pronouns and make them feel safe and welcome when they're in your presence.
Sappho definitely is. She's. The question is, are these people generally well known within the community? I just said the answer. Sappho is definitely one of the most famous examples. The other people we touched on are a little bit less well known because we wanted to touch on people who may not be who may not have been represented before. But the story of Emperor Ai is generally well known. People who have done research into Two-Spirit people would likely know Wei Hua. But other than that, I think Julie and Harry Allen are generally less well known, which is unfortunate.
Though they're not, other than Sappho, most of them are not really well known now. At the time, they were usually very famous because of the shenanigans they got up to, like burning down a convent and like killing a bunch of people in a duel. So generally at the time they were well known. That's all the questions for right now. We will be handing out pins at the steps right here if your teacher wants to come get them or if you want to come get them. And please come to our win. It's during win and it's in Little Peter and it's PSA Hangout. Don't lose the pins. They took multiple hours of work. Please.
Oh, wow. I've been laid out in the truck. You want me to like, because he does like you I don't know what that one is, but I can think of it. Yeah.
Thank you.